The beatings will continue until morale improves. So say the green energy folks. The inflation that we're seeing and the economic downturns that we're seeing, a lot of it has to do with the energy. If you think about the economy as consumption of energy, any world economy, any Western country has very high consumption of energy. If you just apply it to your own life, just the price of gas alone, how much economic distortion has that had in your life? What have you chosen to do or not to do based off the price of gas and filling up your car? So economic growth happens from good, cheap energy that's dense, that allows people to interact with and have economic activity and growth. So you hear a lot of politicians and economists talking about the recession. We just ended Q2 of 2022. And I want to put in perspective why central bankers never say, yeah, I'm pretty sure we're going to have a recession. Think back to last year when Jerome Powell said inflation is transitory. Why did he say that? If a central banker comes out and confirms that inflation is here and is probably here to stay for a long time, what do you think that's going to do to the market? Everyone is trusting the central bank. So if the central bank and their leaders come out and say, yep, this is what we think, people run for the hills, people start hedging for inflation, people start buying up a bunch of stuff. And it's just kind of the self-fulfilling prophecy where it makes inflation worse. So they always downplay the consequences of their stupid monetary policy. Inflation's one of them, and recession's the next. This is why they don't confirm that there's going to be a recession. But since we just ended Q2, are we in a recession? The answer is yes, we are in a recession. The reason they don't want to say for sure we're in a recession yet, and the numbers are going to come out in a couple days, I believe, is because, again, that's self-fulfilling. People still have hope that we're not in a recession. But when those central bankers come out and say, yep, we're in a recession, now all of a sudden people change their investment strategy, etc. So they're always, if you're wondering why they're always wrong, it's because they're always downplaying the reality, because if they admit to it, especially ahead of time, people make it worse, or investors make it worse. And so they always, in other words, lie to you. So what pulls us out of this is economic growth. How does economic growth happen? Through production and consumption of energy. And if you're on it doesn't matter what you think about global warming. If you're a huge believer and all that, that's fine. But you need to understand it's production and consumption of energy that helps the economy grow. And when are we going to see disinflation? When are we going to see inflation going down? People talk about housing. People talk about stocks and all that kind of stuff. We've seen it in equities. We haven't totally seen it in real estate yet. But it all, again, relies on energy. So that energy, and this is why we're in a recession, if that energy costs double what it did last year, what is that doing to economic growth? It's not happening. So if you're wondering, we're in a recession. We'll find out in a week or so. But if you're constantly just, seems like these guys with doctorate degrees at the Fed should know what they're doing. They are between a rock and a hard place, as I mentioned in my last video. They can't tighten too much. There's so much debt in the system. How it affects you is, I think inflation's here for a while. How long, no one can ever predict, but when I mean a while, I mean years. So they need economic growth to get out of it. They have to have it. And so they're battling it on two fronts, and they're doing the wrong thing on both. Inflation's high, and they're essentially killing investment in energy. So it's going to get worse before it gets better. Like I said, beatings will continue until morale improves. So I'm at the end of this video, I'm going to add a video from Congressman from Kentucky. He's talking about the investment in energy and how screwed up it is, and how CapEx, capital expenditure into energy, has dwindled in the last 10 years because of politics. So listen up to that, and they're trying to fix the problem, but we'll see if it happens. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Pay attention to this next video.
Well, I thank my good friend Kevin Hearn from the great state of Oklahoma, not only for his leadership on the Republican Study Committee's Budget and Spending Task Force, ably chairing that committee, but also as an advocate for more domestic energy production to deal with this energy crisis. And like your constituents in Oklahoma, my constituents in rural Kentucky are feeling the pain. I was just with some farmers in Fleming County, Kentucky on Friday when we were back in the district. And one of the farmers stood up and he said, I don't know where you get your numbers in Washington, Congressman, but 8.6% doesn't sound right for us in Fleming County. It's more than twice that. It is painful to fill up the diesel in our tractor. It is impossible for us to fill up our trucks to get around to move our produce. This is not 8.6%. You all don't know what the real number is and how it affects real Americans. That's how bad this inflation crisis is. But I rise in strong support of this Republican Study Committee's proposed federal budget. Our nation is over $30 trillion in debt. This debt crisis threatens the long-term prosperity of every American. And it is that debt, and it is that overspending, Mr. Speaker, that has helped to usher in this historic inflation crisis that is crushing my constituents in Fleming County and so many other middle-class Americans across this country. The RSC budget restores fiscal responsibility to Washington by balancing the federal budget within 10 years and rescuing America from bankruptcy, stopping the spending binge in this town. Let's be clear. We will never balance the federal budget if Democrats continue their spending spree. We will never balance the budget continuing this reckless deficit-producing fiscal policy and threatening tax hikes in this Build Back Better calamity that fails to raise revenue, but instead would crush economic growth and actually diminish the tax base. We will also never balance the budget if the Biden administration continues its inexplicable war on American energy, which is key to economic growth, key to reducing the deficit. That's why I commend RSC Budget and Spending Task Force Chairman Kevin Hearn for including my legislation in the budget, the Fair Access to Banking Act. This legislation, the Fair Access to Banking Act, protects key American industries such as energy producers. And here's the irony. We all care about the environment, especially farmers. We care about the environment. They're the ultimate environmentalists. But what sense does it make to deprive financing to the very energy companies that can innovate our way to solutions to the climate issue? When President Biden was sworn into office, gas prices averaged $2.36 across the country. This month, gas prices reached $5 nationally for the first time. And they're on their way to $6 a gallon. In less than 2 years, our nation went from energy dominant to energy desperate. And yet the Biden administration continues to push ESG investments and regulations such as the SEC's new climate risk disclosure rule designed to choke off investment in energy production. The Biden administration for sure is blocking construction of the Keystone XL pipeline and other energy infrastructure. It's halting new lease sales for oil and gas. It's stonewalling over 4,400 permits to drill. It's thwarting new large-scale refineries. And this has all contributed to constraining energy supply, contributing to inflation. But ground zero in this war against domestic energy production is the Biden administration's weaponization of financial regulation to redirect capital away from fossil energy. The European financial sector, Wall Street banks, large woke asset managers have all started the trend of politicizing capital allocation through the environmental, social, and governance movement. But the Biden administration's Security and Exchange Commission is now making matters worse by proposing a regulation that would force every public company to disclose reams of immaterial and unreliable information about the greenhouse gas emissions arising from their operations, the producers of energy they consume, and even the activities of their suppliers and customers. This 534-page monstrosity marks the transformation of the SEC from an independent agency dedicated to investor protection to an unaccountable and politicized bureaucracy intent on advancing radical environmental policy over which it has neither jurisdiction nor competency. Not only does this regulation discriminate against affordable, reliable energy by redirecting capital away from the American energy sector, it directly conflicts with the SEC's mission to protect investors. While asset managers continually prioritize ESG funds, the fees for those funds are actually, on average, 43% higher than non-ESG funds. Stocks in many ESG-related exchange-traded funds have elevated price-to-earnings multiples precisely because investment returns are sacrificed for non-pecuniary factors and policy objectives like social justice, diversity quotas, and lower carbon emissions. It's time for us to stand up for American energy dominance. It's time for us to stand up for the American energy sector. It's time for us to stand up to retail investors who depend on returns instead of some woke political agenda that, frankly, they don't care about. My farmers in Fleming County depend on returns. They depend on affordable electricity. And Washington is out of touch with the reality and the hardships of American savers and American workers who can't afford Biden's inflation. And that's why we need this budget. Now more than ever, we must defend and encourage investments in American energy production to lower costs for Americans at the pump. Mr. Speaker, the dual visions for the future of America on this issue could not be clearer. On the one hand, congressional Democrats are doubling down on a dangerous agenda in the middle of a generational energy crisis at cost to millions of middle-class Americans, out of touch. On the other hand, Republicans are renewing our commitment through the fair access and banking provision contained in this budget to require lending to be based on risk-based metrics, not on the woke politics of the day. I am proud to stand with my Republican colleagues in support of this budget. I'm proud to stand with Americans who depend on energy independence and energy dominance and affordable, reliable energy. And I ask all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to stand with the American people, not with woke Wall Street, not with large asset managers who put politics ahead of returns. Vote for the Republican Study Committee budget. Thank you to the leadership of my friend from Oklahoma, and I yield back.
I'd like to